Good evening. I'm Tariq Rauf, former head of nuclear verification and security policy at the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, and former alternate head of the IAEA delegation to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, speaking to you from Hiroshima. August 6th and August 9th will mark the 75th anniversary of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. No sentient human being who has met or seen the hibakusha or visited the hypocenters in the two cities or seen the photographic evidence of the destruction can avoid being shocked and horrified by the devastation that nuclear weapons inflicted. Up until now, Hiroshima and Nagasaki mercifully remain the only two instances in which nuclear weapons have been used in war. However, it has been the hope that the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki serves as a constant reminder why preventing the further use and proliferation of such weapons and why nuclear disarmament, leading eventually to a nuclear weapon-free world, is of utmost importance and for the survival of humankind and planet Earth. Unfortunately, the vision of ridding the world of nuclear weapons is receding as the nuclear arms control architecture, patiently built up over the past 50 years, is collapsing before our eyes. On the 2nd of August 2019, the United States formally withdrew from the 1987 Treaty on Shorter Range and Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces, or INF, foreshadowed in July of 2019 by the Russian Federation suspending its compliance with the treaty. Under the INF Treaty, by May 1991, 2,692 ballistic and cruise missiles with ranges between 500 and 5,500 kilometers had been eliminated. 1,846 by the Soviet Union and 846 by the United States. This was done under mutual verification, and nearly 5,000 nuclear warheads were removed from active service. Now this leaves only one nuclear arms reduction treaty in force between Moscow and Washington. That is the New Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or New START, that was signed on 8th of April 2010. It entered into force on 5th of February 2011. By the 4th of February 2018, both Russia and the United States had verifiably met the central limits of 1,550 accountable deployed strategic nuclear warheads and 700 deployed launches, that is, land and sea-based intercontinental ballistic missiles and long-range bombers. On the 1st of July, under New START, Russia had 524 deployed launches carrying 1,461 nuclear warheads, and the United States had 656 warheads on 1,365 launches. In addition to these deployed weapons between the Russian side and the United States side, the two of them own somewhere around 12,000 nuclear warheads in total. Now, New START will expire on the 5th of February 2021, unless extended by Presidents Putin and Trump. Should New START not be extended, it will leave Moscow and Washington without any bilateral nuclear arms control treaty for the first time in over a half century, and likely lead to a dangerous new nuclear arms race. For the first time in the history of the Soviet-Russian or United States nuclear arms control, not only are existing agreements being dismantled, but the two sides have not been engaging on new measures for nearly a decade now. And both sides are modernizing nuclear arsenals and have lowered the threshold of nuclear weapon use in their declaratory and operational policies. Furthermore, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, or CTBT, has not entered into force 24 years after it was opened for signature in 1996. The 2017 Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or TPNW, has been unnecessarily rejected by 38 states that continue to rely on nuclear deterrence, and they strongly object to the efforts of the vast majority of United Nations member states to implement effective measures for nuclear disarmament. The negotiation of global treaties on the verified production ban of fissile material for nuclear weapons and on the non-weaponization of space have not started, and many other nuclear disarmament commitments remain unfulfilled, while at the same time nuclear dangers are increasing. The architecture and fundaments of bilateral and multilateral nuclear arms control have been eroded by the events that I have just noted. By the United States' withdrawal in 2002 from the crucial Anti-Ballistic Missile or ABM Treaty, and by the failure of the 5 nuclear weapon states, that is China, France, Russia, United Kingdom, and the United States, to fully honor the commitments on nuclear arms reductions agreed in the framework of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and its review conferences held in 1995, 2000, and 2010. One may also note that the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, agreed between the European Union, 3 European powers, and 3 other powers, and Iran, which led to constraints on Iran's uranium enrichment, has been abandoned, but mainly by the United States, and this has further destabilized the situation in the Middle East and has raised the prospects of yet another war in that region. Now, doctrines of some nuclear armed states posit first or early use of nuclear weapons. For example, the United States Defense Department's new nuclear weapons guidance, called Nuclear Operations, released on the 11th of June 2019, clearly posits that using nuclear weapons could create conditions for decisive results and the restoration of strategic stability. For its part, Russian military doctrine envisions escalation to de-escalate, encountering superior NATO conventional forces, that is, early but limited use of nuclear weapons. In South Asia, both India and Pakistan also contemplate use of nuclear weapons in a regional conflict. It is highly disturbing that when nuclear weapon use is discussed, the vocabulary used is very often conveniently sanitized. The destruction by thermonuclear war and resulting humanitarian and environmental consequences are downplayed and substituted by antiseptic concepts of nuclear deterrence. Worrisomely, it is the view of many erstwhile personalities, such as William Perry, former United States Defense Secretary among others, that in today's world, the dangers of inadvertent, accidental, or even deliberate use of nuclear weapons is higher than it was during the height of the Cold War. The Gorbachev-Reagan understanding of December 1987 that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought is no longer in the forefront of the minds of today's leaders and nuclear war planners. This year, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist set the clock, which puts into context how close we are to nuclear catastrophe, at 100 seconds to midnight. This is closer to catastrophe than at any year during the Cold War. We might well ask why we find ourselves in such a dire predicament, especially since there was much talk about a peace dividend and a new world order at the beginning of the 1990s when the Cold War ended, and there was the promise of reducing the role of nuclear weapons in international security. The Non-Proliferation Treaty had been extended indefinitely in 1995. The Nuclear Test Ban Treaty had been completed in 1996. The 5 nuclear weapon states had agreed to an unequivocal undertaking to nuclear disarmament and a plan of action to that effect in 2000 and 2010 in the NPT review conferences. The principal reason is that the NPT nuclear weapon states have not fulfilled their nuclear disarmament commitments as agreed under the framework of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Albeit both Russia and the United States claim that they have reduced their nuclear arsenals by about 80% over their Cold War heights, but both are busy modernizing nuclear arsenals and lowering the threshold of nuclear war. In fact, today nearly 14,000 nuclear weapons are deployed at 14 locations in several states, and we have nearly 2 million tons of weapon-usable material that is available that could potentially be used for 150,000 nuclear weapons. The Non-Proliferation Treaty is marking its 50th anniversary this year. Alarm bells are already ringing, warning about the impending failure of this year's review conference. Returning to nuclear disarmament, in the context of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the field is now crowded with several competing approaches. The non-aligned movement, or NAM, states favor a 3-phase time-bound plan of action. In contrast, the Western states stand by a step-by-step approach which has been slightly modified by a cross-cutting group called the Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Initiative, or NPDI, that calls for building blocks, while another such group, the New Agenda Coalition, or NAC, supports a taking forward nuclear disarmament approach. Sweden has recently proposed stepping stones to nuclear disarmament, and the United States has advanced the concept of creating the Environment for Nuclear Disarmament, or CEND. These different approaches have clashed last year and the year before in the sessions of the Preparatory Committee for this year's NPT Review Conference, and very likely these discussions and clashes will continue when we meet in April and May in New York. With regard to the CEND approach of the United States, 2 meetings have already been held and a third is planned for April. Many diplomats who have attended did so because they could not refuse the invitation from the United States. Others, though skeptical, did not want to be left out, and some were loyal troopers, intoxicated by the promise of CEND as a godsend to rescue the NPT. A sober assessment of the CEND approach suggests that this initiative is geared to transfer the focus and responsibility for the environment and conditions for nuclear disarmament from the nuclear-armed to the non-nuclear weapon states. In fact, the CEND approach, as presently formulated, is serving the cause of creating the conditions to never disarm, as I have already explained just now. It would be appropriate to characterize CEND approach as being based on dreaming of rainbows, butterflies, and unicorns to appear magically and sprinkle fairy dust, leading to a fantasy world of nuclear arms control. A senior US official recently characterized supporters of nuclear disarmament in the framework of the NPT as dim bulbs, in other words, as grossly stupid, and their attitudes as some admixture of stupidity and insanity. Never has the level of discourse sunk so abysmally low, or abuse hurled so openly. If senior officials apparently are becoming unhinged and the level of discourse sinks into the gutter, this obviously cannot portend well for developing common ground between nuclear weapon and non-nuclear weapon states at this very important Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference coming up in 2 months from now. Placing one's faith in the rainbows, butterflies, and unicorns of the CEND approach is not the way forward to save the world from the dangers of nuclear destruction. Faithfully implementing nuclear disarmament obligations in the framework of the NPT is the only way forward to salvation. Now, since we unfortunately might be on the verge of the novel coronavirus, or COVID-19, becoming a pandemic, and seemingly that some senior officials might be losing their mental balance, I would recommend that we now consider postponing the 2020 NPT Review Conference to 2021, that is next year, and to hold it in Vienna, Austria, which is the historical city of conferences for 2 centuries. Finally, to end, a world without nuclear weapons still remains a far-off goal, and we need to heed the call of Pope Francis when, during his visit to Hiroshima, he clearly voiced his demand that world powers renounce their nuclear arsenals. He declared that both the use and possession of atomic bombs an immoral crime and a dangerous waste. I end by recalling Pope Francis's lament. May we never forget the historic sacrifice of the victims of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Thank you.